Man. So Joe Biden.
Yeah, what about Joe Biden?
I just think about Joe Biden nowadays. Like, I don't know. Like, he really wanted to run for president again. But like the society and the political landscape in Washington D.C. of the United States of America basically told him, "Hey Joe, I know you're dreaming your dream, but it's not in the cards, man."
I mean, at least that's a little better than them going up to him and saying, "Hey Joe, what are you doing with that gun in your hand?"
Yeah. I mean, if Joe Biden had a gun, that would be interesting. But I got to feel for Joe because when you punish a person for dreaming his dream, you better not expect him to thank you or forgive you.
You were going to have the last word on this, weren't you? I knew you were.
Absolutely, man. And welcome back, everybody, to the best music podcast on this side of the Mississippi, hosted by two dashingly good-looking men who will not talk another word about Joe Biden and the political landscape of the United States of this America. I am the one, the only, the undisputed Ryan James Kearns.
And I am the one, the only, the ready to discuss another state, not Delaware, not Pennsylvania, but Texas, Matthew James Durzik.
And for those of you who are brand new to this podcast here, first of all, welcome. Second of all, this podcast is called Hey, Listen to This, in case you, I don't know, are waking up from a coma, or you're waking up from just falling asleep, and somehow your media player is automatically fed you to us by some means or another. But what me and Matt do here is we take turns dissecting album. Well, we take turns picking albums that we are going to dissect. It could be for a couple different reasons why we chose that album. I know this year alone, we've tackled a couple of the biggest releases year to date, that being Taylor Swift's The Tortured Poets Department, and then a few weeks back we covered Charli XCX's Brat.
Yes, two albums that have come out this year, and we actually covered a third album from this year, although that easily was the worst of not just the three we covered from this year, but worst that we've ever done. If you'd like to figure out which one that is, you just go back and listen to our whole library and find out for yourself. Spoiler alert, it's Pearl Jam. But, so this year, this time on this episode, we're not going to 2024. In fact, Ryan, what year are we going to?
We are going to the year of our Lord, 2002. And the album that we're going to be discussing in that year, it's going to be the Checks Notes. It is going to be the 6th album released by the group called the Mountain Goats. If you are listening to this podcast and you're like, Ryan, what are the Mountain Goats? Well, listener, I'm here to tell you. So, the Mountain Goats, it's primarily a project, musical project, fronted by one John Darnielle. I mean, there's been various players that have come in and out of the group. You think about how Nine Inch Nails, the main member of that group is Trent Reznor. That the Mountain Goats are basically kind of that formula, and they have been going strong since 1994. And the way that I personally got into them, because this was my turn to choose the album that we were going to dissect is back in 2012 when I was really starting to expand my musical taste. I think it was thanks to one Anthony Fantano who reviewed the album by the Mountain Goats that was released in that year, Transcendental Youth. And I remember really liking that album. I mean, they had, like, a lot of cool songs on there. I mean, you get Cry for Judas, which is probably, like, my favorite song off of there. And then you get Amy, a.k.a. Spent Gladiator 1. And then Lakeside View Apartment Suite. I mean, with those, names for tracks alone, like, that at least, like, catches my interest. And then from there, like, my love and appreciation for the band has it's been rather interesting because, like, at that point, I kind of checked out their back catalog. No real album really kind of stuck with me. I mean, I listened to singles from The Sunset Tree, All Eternal's Deck, and that was about it up until the point that after 2012, like, their next album that they released was in 2015, and that's when their discography gets a little bit interesting because, like, John Darnielle was like, I'm about, like, almost, like, over a dozen albums in at this point. I'm about to get a little bit, like, weird with it. So, like, in 2015, he released an album called Beat the Champ. All songs based off of, like, themes that involve pro wrestling. And then in 2017, an album that I actually own on vinyl, it's called Goss, which is basically, about goss. And what made that record special was the fact that John challenged himself to, like, create songs that did not incorporate the guitar whatsoever, and it's still a fantastic album in my opinion. And then after that you get albums like In League with Dragons, which is, like, fantasy D&D based. And then probably his most interesting song topic / like album concept, it happened in 2020, which was Getting Into Knives, which was all about, like, knives. And then an album that I don't own on vinyl, but I own in my Bandcamp collection, got released in 2022, and that album is called Bleed Out. And that album, it's basically kind of like, your early 70s or 80s, like, action / like thriller cop movie themes. Like, I know, like, the opening track off of there was called Training Montage. And, and then at that point, somewhere within, like, me dissecting and, like, not dissecting, but, like, appreciating those albums, I listened to a podcast called I Only Listen to the Mountain Goats. And the very first season that they did, they covered the album that we're about to talk about today, which was All Hail West Texas. And full disclosure, the way that podcast was structured, at the end of every episode, and every episode was basically about one specific track off of that album, there was a special guest artist that did a cover of that specific song that they discussed. And, ladies and gentlemen, I actually own that album of covers from that podcast on vinyl. And when I recently went on vacation down to Asheville, North Carolina, I found All Hail West Texas on vinyl, like the original Mountain Goats, like, release, and I picked that up. So this is the only record that I own twice on vinyl, if you really think about it, Matt.
Which is impressive because of a couple reasons. Number one, vinyl is not necessarily the cheapest thing to afford these days. And secondly, that a album inspired you to pick up a cover album, and you have both on vinyl. That is, again, just remarkable. And what makes it so remarkable is that, for those who have never listened to this album, One little word of note, it is a rather lo-fi operation. So, needless to say, I feel like there's been more high-tech energy put into talking about the Mountain albums, including All Hail West Texas, than there actually was in producing, recording, and possibly releasing All Hail West Texas. Not that any of those are bad things, but we'll discuss as we go along.
And for those of you who are like, okay, in terms of like, the amount of technology that was put into like, recording this specific album, me and Matt are basically like the way that we record our podcast is like, it's not the most like, studio produced kind of podcast in terms of like, I'm on my laptop right now with a decent microphone, and Matt is basically kind of on a similar setup. I mean, we've kind of adjusted over like, several episodes of how we do these recordings. John Darnielle recorded this on a boom box, man. Like, he just hit record on a tape recorder, and he just sang into like the microphone. He sang into like the cassette recorder thing, and like you can really hear it in some of the like tracks. Is like often the tracks either end or begin with like a little like a warpy kind of effect, dude.
Yeah, there is a very raw feedback at the end of a lot of these tracks, and instead of causing any type of real angst or unprofessionalism, it just adds an ambiance to the nature of this album. So, want to get into it?
Yeah, man. Let's get at her, and I'll take actually the first track here. So the opening track off of this album here specifically is the best ever death metal band in Denton, and this is a fantastic way to open up like this album here specifically for a couple different reasons. One, you get the gist of like how the instrumentation and like how it's going to sound right out of the gate, and you basically are forced to listen to how John is delivering the story, this message that is coming across. And the message itself, it's basically about like lyrically, you get this story about these two friends named Cyrus and Jeff, and they were forming this band, and it was a death metal band. And this, as they were working out names for the band, one was Satan's Fingers and the Killers and Hospital Bombers, and Jeff and Cyrus really believed that they were gonna make it into the big time, and so they, so as the lyrics read, so in script that made prominent use of a pentagram, they stenciled their drum heads and guitars with their names. And basically, what John was the way John delivers the story from here is that Cyrus actually gets sent off to a school, and they basically kind of try to brainwash him into thinking that, hey, you're never gonna get famous. This whole death metal band that you're forming with Jeff is never gonna be a thing. And then later on, in the next verse, you get this youthful kind of spirit of rebellion with lyrics when you punish a person for dreaming his dream, don't expect him to think he will forgive you. The best ever death metal band of Denton will, in time, both outpace and live you. And dude, I love this track because for the simple fact, it reminds me of just how great singer-songwriters, how great country artists, how great folk artists are able to tell, clean and concise stories that anybody can really latch onto. I mean, who hasn't felt oppressed and held back from their dreams and their lives? And yeah, dude, I really, really like this song. And it also helps. Well, I don't want to say it helps, but what makes this song specifically even stand out even just a little bit more is the ending I want to even say like chant, or I feel dirty by saying this, but like mantra of like John Darnielle saying "Hell Satan" like over and over again. So overall, like I really love how this track here opens everything up.
I really do too, and you highlighted the lyrical moment for me on this track, where John Darnielle says, when you punish a person for dreaming his dream, don't expect him to thank or forgive you. It carries the weight of such a passive-aggressive tone that is sprinkled throughout the track. And the one thing that got me about this particular track, not just the lo-fi production of it, or lack thereof in a sense, but also, again, the lack of production as far as the actual song itself. Because most songs, tend to have a lyrical structure and a rhyming structure of, AABB or ABAB or ABABC, AB, whatever the case may be. Here he's just literally telling you a story and just trying to match the rhythm of the guitar as he's strumming along. That is such a bare bones knock to the teeth that you can't help but respect it. It carries almost like a weird camp counselor vibe, and I would love for this song to be like played at like a Boy Scout camp just to see all the scouts' faces and be like, what is he talking about? What's going on here? Because this is a very camp counselor vibe type of song, but it is not that at all as far as the details. I think his singing's very good in its sort of plaintive sense, almost like a old school like Lou Reed, Velvet Underground type of delivery. And this, to me, again, like you said, starts the album on a very high note. In fact, I have it in my top 3 at number 3.
So this track is not in my top 3. I respect the hell out of it, though. And a couple of other notes I want to throw out there before we move on to the Fall of the Star high school running back is that, so, like, for the first time in the history of this podcast, dude, like, when I was researching, like, like all the tracks for the album they were going to discuss, I ran across a fan wiki, like, website for that specific band. Like, dude, we've covered, like, the Smiths, Taylor Swift, Billie Eilish, even like Led Zeppelin, dude. And like, for some reason, not like, I mean, I could be extremely wrong, especially with the Led Zeppelin one, because that was like literally our second episode. But that being said, like, I haven't come across a situation where like there's legitimately like a fan wiki page for every single like thing that the band has said about, like, every single track. So I'm gonna give the cliff notes of what John has said about the best ever death metal band in Denton. So, like, in terms of like the messaging and the feel, we both covered it pretty well. I mean, to summarize that quickly, John says this song is basically saying like, hey, I wish you well, but I will not allow you to hold me down. And I mean, that's all about like the youthful spirit of rebellion that we've discussed like over and over again. And then more specifically, he's talking about like when he's saying "Hail Satan," he doesn't really mean Satan. He means the principles of liberation, which he understands to be the divine within us. A principle a lot of religious systems tend to suppress for the worst health of their communities and to the detriment of the movement and of the spirit in this world. So, like, you think about like how this track is portrayed, like, you have Jeff and Cyrus who want to form this band and like, really just want to create something in the world, and you get the world basically saying, hey, you're never going to be famous. And at the very end, John's singing like, hey, let's try to still believe in our dreams, believe in ourselves, because despite what the world has to say, we're going to make it at the end of the day.
And it is kind of a good thing that such interpretation has been added, because again, to the untrained ear, this could very well be just, some recluse from, death metal band or some punk rock band that would have played, long nights at the Blue Violet in Rochester, just sort of waxing poetic in a very angsty way about their past. But at the same time, if that was what it was in the end, so be it, because this album is full of that.
Exactly, man. So, the next track is Fall of the Star High School Running Back.
Fall of the Star High School Running Back, and lo and behold, just as I was talking about, an angsty retrospective on the past. This song, it's a very descriptive song about someone who used to be a star athlete on a football team, got injured. Then they ended up trying to find a way to make it big, or make big bucks at least. So they got into selling acid, ended up getting busted by a cop. And the way that Darnielle puts this all out here is very, very descriptive. And it keeps up that same tone of, I'm not really interested in rhyming words. I just want to tell you what happened. Throughout this song. The only knock I have on this song is that it's so quick and rushed out that it almost feels like a parody almost, where it's just like, this is a song about a story and that's the end. Like, what happened there? Like this track, I think this is the shortest track on the album, just clocking over a minute and a half. So it just goes in and out so quickly. It's not a bad song by any means, but it is very slight.
Dude, I'm right there with you. After re-listening to this track several times over, I really get the feeling hey, if you're not paying attention to what this track is bringing to the table, you're gonna miss it. I mean, and to tell you how much you have the ability to miss it, whenever you were talking about the messaging of after things go bad for this high school star, in terms of when he gets injured in his junior year and he tries to find other ways to make money, up to the point that I actually sat down and dissected this track here specifically. I really didn't capture the ultimate meaning of this track. I thought it was just a slight diss to high school jocks, but actually it's really about how a small mistake that you make in your youth, due to the current laws in this country, where minimum sentencing actually does exist. If you make that kind of a small mistake, next thing you know, next moment of freedom that you have is going to be when you're 40. And dude, that's basically a quarter of your life just gone like that. And outside of the messaging itself, because the whole concept of minimum sentencing, it was something that John Darnielle has spoke on when it comes to describing this here song specifically. One thing I did dig in here though specifically, and John does do a really good job with this album here as a whole, capturing feels with specific songs. So the previous track, you get that open road feel and just that youthful feel for rebellion. Here it's kind of a happy-go-lucky kind of vibe. And I think that was mainly due to the fact this star running back that was in high school, he was having such a great time, and then after he got injured, it was just a little bit of a bummer, but then he discovered a way to actually make money outside of that. And then maybe he could have changed things up at the end, making it not the same kind of vibe. But I mean, overall though, I like this song maybe a little a hair less than the previous track, but nonetheless, it's still a pretty solid track from Mr. Darnielle.
Agreed, and because it's such a short song, again, it goes by so quickly that it's really doesn't super register, but it registers enough that it makes you be oh, okay, so this is what we're going for, especially considering, like I said earlier, it carries the tone of the first track in the same manner.
So, talking about like carrying tone and like how John Darnielle is able to like portray different feelings. Let's move on to the next track, and that next track is "Color in Your Cheeks." And dude, I love this song. I'm just gonna come out right out of the gate and say it. This song here is specifically my second favorite song on the album, and for just the feel that Darnielle was really going for, it kind of reminded me of like Bob Dylan's "Shelter from the Storm" from the Blood on the Tracks. And for those of you who are familiar with that album and want to hear what Matt and I have to say about it specifically, make sure you check out that review. It will be in your in that podcasting app that you're currently listening to us on. So check it out after you get done with this review. But yeah, the way that he's able to capture that feel about like how everybody belongs where they feel like they ought to belong is perfect on a T, because you get different stories about like different people traveling and needing some place to call their own. And one moment I'm going to really highlight here is, I think it's the third story that John is talking about here in this track, and the lyrics read, "But 5 minutes looking in his eyes, and we all knew he was broken pretty bad. So we gave him what we had. We cleared a space for him to sleep in, and we let the silence, that's our trademark, make its presence felt." And for those of you who are like kind of confused about the concept of like how silence can actually heal somebody that's kind of broken, I mean, I recently have gotten into like meditation myself, and like I've gotten to the point like the app that I'm using is guiding me through like extended minutes of silence and just being there, not necessarily with my thoughts, but like focusing on my breath and like doing like different techniques. And dude, it is absolutely transforming whenever you don't have anything going on in the background and you can just not do anything for an extended period of time. It's a good way to reset your brain. And for those of you who like if this person in this song here was broken pretty bad, like for him to get like that silence is gonna be all that he needs. So dude, like I can't say enough good things about this track.
It is a really, really good track. It is not in my top three, but I can understand completely why it's in yours. It's the first song on the album that really goes more towards a more traditional song structure, kind of like you said, similar to "Shelter from the Storm." But it still has that loose narrative appeal of the first two tracks, where it's more focused on telling a story and getting out all the right details in a way that is very stripped down and very plaintive in its delivery. A lot of the stuff you said about how it describes, dealing with a situation where you're just trying to get the hell out of there, and how people turn to the wrong thing in order to do that. And one other thing that I'll mention, again, because I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head, the end of the track kind of goes on for a little bit after Darnielle is done singing it. It's just strumming for not quite a minute, but definitely like a good 30 seconds. And we talked about this before in our Disintegration interview for The Cure, where one thing that they did a lot, and what Darnielle does a couple times on this album, is he doesn't end the track right away, and he lets it breathe for a little bit. And I particularly like that here, because it provides the listener at best a time to, like you say, meditate and sort of think about the situation that is just transcribed, or perhaps at the very least giving Darnielle himself a chance to think about what is, come out of his mouth. And at the very worst, it's just nice, pleasant strumming along, just, no real gimmicks, no real fussiness, just, a man and his guitar, kind of like you would hear at acoustic night at a bar, just very, very pleasant. So yeah, I like the song a lot too. Not in my top three, but it's a very, very good song.
Cool. Yeah, not much else I can really say about that because we've covered it pretty well. I mean, I think the refrain here is pretty sick. I mean, the refrain goes, "Come on in. We haven't slept for weeks. Drink some of this. It'll put color in your cheeks." So, like, I like how the track is centered around that feeling of like communion and like there's something to be said about like, I mean, people could imagine like drink some of this, which could be like an alcoholic or an adult beverage, but it could be just as something as like a glass of water or like like a cup of whatever your favorite beverage is. I do believe like what Darnielle was going for in this track here was just about that communion aspect. So yeah, you ready to talk about Forrest Gump's favorite girl?
Would you be talking about Jenny?
Jenny!
Yes, I am ready to talk about Jenny, or Jenny, as most people would normally say. This song is about a couple things. It is about a motorcycle, and it is about a girl. Probably the one that's named Jenny. And it's another song, much like Fall the Star High School Running Back, that's short but packed with detail, and it kind of comes and goes quickly, so if you aren't paying attention, you're going to miss like half the story. But once again, sort of has a brighter feel to it, similar to the album opener, and the way he sings is a little bit more passionate, a little bit more focused, and the way that he's describing sort of how one side of the equation, which is the motorcycle in her yard, and also the smell of her hair that he's describing in almost but not fully creepy tone, because smelling hair, go check Reddit about those memes. Yeah, I think that this is a very solid song. Once again, not my top three, but once again, it maintains that sort of vibe of like we've talked before about the sequentialness of albums, and how albums that tend to be more sequential and tell more of a story tend to, come across more favorably or more interesting at the very least. This sort of helps do that, at least providing, if nothing else, another short story to add ambiance to everything that's already been talked about before. Whether they connect with the other three, that's up to the listener to decide, but all in all to say, it's a short song, not my top three, but it is good as well. It goes in the good song bucket.
Oh, you're bringing back that trope, aren't you, man? The good song bucket.
I got to bring back the good song bucket.
It's a good bucket, man. So, I would like your discussion about like how this track here specifically allows us to get like a little bit of a short story within its own little moment here, and I would argue that like the like a good bit of like the following tracks from here on out do connect this song here specifically in like a very through line. Well, maybe not a through line, but like as we get deeper into the album, I'll make my connections. I'm not. I mean, I could maybe try to like maybe stretch the connection with the previous tracks, but I'm not going to do that for the sake of this review. I imagine like there's some like fan theories out there, considering like how many diehard Mountain Goats fans there are out there in the universe. But this song here, getting back to it, dude, like again, we go from a second favorite song to my third favorite song, like back to back. So like this stretch of songs here specifically, it's a fantastic time for me. And like what John has said here specifically, I'm not going to read it here verbatim, but it's basically about like talk about like more difficult times for people, but like those people are in wilder times, and they're romanticizing the moment, and they're remembering at the time when they're on this motorcycle with no responsibilities, and they're living the pirate's life. And like the pirate's life that they're discussing, it's about like living carefree and like and even a lyric here specifically that I absolutely love. It comes towards the end of the track, and it reads, "We were the one thing in the galaxy God did not have his eyes on." And it's like, this track is basically about like embracing that love, embracing that freedom, embracing life as a whole, and realizing that, hey, there's not a warrant out for your arrest, and like, nobody's looking for you, and like you have nothing but the horizon, that person that you're attached to, like, to give you company and give you that sense of hope. And like even outside of that moment, like how this track opens up, it kind of reminds me of like Car Wheels on a Gravel Road, in such where you get like the visual of like somebody pulling up to where like that other person lives, and then you go out on a journey. And just the way that this journey ends, it seems like, a little bit more of a positive ending, at least within this track here, as compared to Car Wheels on a Gravel Road. Both, fantastic songs in their own right. I like the way that they're able to tell the story pretty up straightly. But, yeah, dude, like, I love how with these tracks here so far, like, what we've talked about within this album, like, yes, there's John Darnielle singing. Yes, there's the guitar going. But I feel like I'm sucked more into the stories as compared to like the song structures alone. So, yeah, easy third favorite track for me, my dude.
All right, so we get the 1-2, or not 1-2, but 2-3 punch of "Color in Your Cheeks Fall" by Jenny for you. So, so far we've gotten onto a strong start, at least on your end.
Yeah. And full disclosure, like, I do have a bottom two in this review here, and I literally just said Jenny was my third favorite, so I do have a top three. So I don't like that's how like the tracks are going to be laid out, but I think it's time that we talk about some fault lines.
Let's talk about some fault lines.
So, fault lines. This is where I'm gonna start making some connections to like the couple that was named, like that was presented to us in Jenny. So, I do like this song a great deal, and it could have maybe cracked into my top three if it wasn't for the fact it kind of reminded me of another song within the Mountain Goats discography. And that song specifically is named No Children. And for those of you who are even vaguely aware of what the Mountain Goats have done in terms of like their musical careers, they like you guys will know what the song No Children is. And that song goes a little bit harder into the paint. And within the Mountain Goats lore, like there's this couple called the Alpha Couple, and they're like referenced several times over throughout the whole catalog of the group itself. But in this song here specifically, this is not an Alpha Couple song, according to Mr. Darnielle himself. And it just seems like here in Jenny, you get the feeling like like the couple has fallen in love. Now it's just like, oh, hey, they basically kind of hate each other. Like, there's several references within the track itself of like, using the metaphor of like, different faults. Like, the first reference is, I got a cracked engine block, both of us do. Next reference is, I got termites in the framework, so do you. And then the other one is talking about, I got sugar in the fuel lines, both of us do. And like the last one, actually, I just missed was, I got pudding for a backbone, but so do you. Like, it almost seems like it's turning the notion of, like, a traditional refrain, or like how Bob Dylan ended a lot of his earlier, well, I don't want to say earlier, but like when we discussed Blood on the Tracks, I made note of the fact that he would end a lot of his phrases with the same line, almost using it as like a period point or a punctuation mark. Here, Darnielle is like, kind of playing with that trope, but switching it up. I like this song a lot. Not in my top three, but could easily maybe could crack it up in there in about like a couple years down the line.
Yeah, I like this song too, and I find it very interesting that you used the comparison of Bob Dylan, because I also found some parallels to Bob Dylan in this song, particularly the way he sings is very Dylan-esque. It very much reminds me of something that could have been off of the freewheeling Bob Dylan in style and tone. And I do love that line of "I got termites in the framework, so do you," because not only is that a great line in and of itself, but the way that he sings it, particularly compared to any of the other lines on the song, he wants you to know this. He wants the listener to hear this. He puts it out there with such great emphasis that it's a standout line in a otherwise decent song. It's not my top three either. One other note I have about this song particularly is the way it ends once again, because it is a very, very passive aggressive song, and very, I don't know, whose fault it is, but I guess it's somebody's fault, isn't it? And the way he sings "la la la" at the end of the song is so deliberately snarky and full of piss and vinegar that it comes as, sort of a sardonic appreciation. And also, you mentioned how this song contrasts this couple, or at least John Darnielle's mind of a couple or himself, in a stark contrast to Jenny. It almost makes Jenny feel like a memory as compared to Fault Lines, that, Fault Lines is where they're at now, and Jenny is sort of remembering back to where they were. And there's another song coming up soon that also falls in that same vein.
Absolutely. And man, I just love like how basic of an album this is in terms of like how it was recorded, and like the song structures themselves. Like, we're able to dig into like juicy little nuggets like this. But you're ready to move on to the next track here?
Yes, the next track is Balance. And this is another song that I wouldn't say it's a very quick song, but it's a very simple song. That kind of follows up thematically well from Fault Lines, that if Jenny was bliss and Fault Lines is pure anger, then Balance is, I guess, self-explanatory. It's the balance point of the discussion in revolving around. And it's not necessarily a standout song to me, not my top three, or full disclosure, bottom one. But there was one line in particular of the song that really got me towards the end of the song, where Darnielle's singing, "We are far too slow to outrun it now, but not too far gone to care." Basically saying, listen, we have to confront certain things, and, we could just pass this off as something else that we have to do, but realistically, we know this is going to affect us emotionally in one way or the other, and it might affect this relationship in one way or another. Now, whether this is about a couple, or whether this is about him and a friend, maybe it's about Jeff from the best ever death metal band in Denton, I don't know. But what I do know is this is a very good song that, again, provides a quote-unquote balance compared to the prior two songs that, again, go to the extremes of bliss and anger.
I agree with you, man, and even adding to like your discussion there, because I don't want to steal too much of your thunder, because I do really like the lyric that you highlighted, which was we are far too slow to route and run it now, but not too far gone to care. Even like throughout this track here specifically, like the imagery that Darnielle, gives the listener, literally the opening lyrics said, it's talking about, sweet I see underneath like a tree, and you can picture this couple just enjoying like a nice summer or springtime afternoon or early evening, and the love that they once nurtured is disintegrating violently. And the next set of lyrics is talking about sticking your tongue out, you can picture almost like volcanic ash of their volcanic ashes of their love coming down from the sky. And it's great imagery. Other than that, in terms of the overall feel, I feel like that's the main trick that this track here specifically brings to the table. I mean, it's one hell of a good trick because you can really get behind the emotions that John Darnielle is bringing to the table. And one other lyric that I do like here is the line about trying to squeeze tears out of mute stones. And that is a reference to Cicero's In Veranum. If I'm mispronouncing that, I do apologize. But the reference reads, if I uttered them in some most desolate wilderness to the stones and rocks, still all things, mute and inanimate as they might be, would be moved. So, yeah, overall, though, again, I like the song maybe a little less than Fault Lines. Maybe because of how Darnielle's able to incorporate different tropes and play with the lyrics in that song. This song here, I feel like it's more about the imagery and what it's trying to convey within that. Still, this song is a great time for me.
It's a good time. It's a good time. Again, if you're just listening to this album, sort of not necessarily dissecting everything or trying to read into the lines as heavy as we are, it flows very nicely from one track to another.
So, I feel like it's time to talk about Pink and Blue. Are you ready to talk about some Pink and Blues here?
I am ready to talk about some Pink and Blue.
So, this is a track that I think I might change my opinion on after several listens, because up until this point in our discussions about the tracks here, I thought that this was a decent enough song, but it kind of, I'm gonna officially change my ranking here. I'm only just gonna bump it up by 1 point, to be honest with you. I'm curious to see if that's gonna overall affect my rating of the album. I mean, I'll let you know at the end. But this song here, what John Darnielle is telling a story about, it's about child abandonment. So the way that this track opens up is you get the lyric, "Wind out of Oklahoma this morning smelled like blood and smoke." And you get this imagery of these crows that Darnielle's talking about are discussing their future. They're out on their branches, and then next thing you know, this guy discovers these abandoned children on his front porch. And I like the lyrics that come after that talk about what he's doing to trying to provide for them. And outside you get the crows still complaining about the finer points of politics. And overall, though, it's a pretty simple song on the surface, but the contrast between what's going on inside of the house that the narrator is living right now, how he's caring for this set of children that he discovered on his front porch, as compared to what's going out in the outside of his house, where people are just being crows and just complaining about random different stuff. I like that. I appreciate it. Doesn't crack my top 3. The number 1 spot is still firmly cemented into the ground for a very good reason. But Overall, though, I really do like this song. I did appreciate what John brought to the table with this one.
I will say that opening line about smelling like blood and smoke is a fantastic opening line to the song. And I will say that the lyrics as a whole are pretty good too. But if I'm being completely honest, this is my least favorite song on the album. And the reason why is because while the lyrics are, again, solid, really what gets me about this song and why I don't like it as much as any of the others is the fact that the lyrics aren't necessarily as super descriptive as some of the previous tracks. And most importantly, the singing to me, I mean, I'm not saying that a song about finding twins on a doorstep necessarily has to sound like, a Black Sabbath song or Martina McBride, or has to have the powerful oomph of, oh no, children on my doorstep that do not belong to me, what shall I do? But it's got to have a little bit more of a passion than the one I hear here, because it feels like he's being a little too twinkly, a little too like lullaby-ish. And I get it's a song about children, but I don't know, it just rubbed me the wrong way. It sounded like, if you're familiar with Schoolhouse Rock, the song called 3 is a Magic Number, it kind of reminded me of that. I'm just thinking, I don't know, again, my opinion is what it is. If you disagree with it, that's fine, but just that little bit of a, when he says pink and blue, what should I do? I'm just thinking, is this Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood? I don't know anymore. So, no offense to Mr. Rogers. Shout out to the GOAT. But yeah, least favorite track on the album.
And that's perfectly fair, man. Like, we've had points in this show where, like, I mean, even in our Gang of Youth episode, like, my favorite track was your least favorite track. So, like, and, like, we're allowed to have, like, differing opinions. And as, like, what was, like, said in, like, our show's history is opinions are facts. But, ladies and gentlemen, like, this is just our opinion to, like, quote Mr. Anthony Fantano. So I mean, that at the end of the day this is what this whole review process is. But I mean, it's a sentiment, like, multiple people can share if they want to, like, check out this album and want to see, like, if our tastes align. Still, like, this track as a whole, it's not one of my favorites, but I mean, I've grown on it a little bit, but I can totally respect where your thoughts and feelings are about Pink and Blue are.
Yeah, and our feelings are not necessarily facts. You are free to listen to this album and come to your own conclusion, as it were.
So, moving on from Pink and Blue, we're going to be talking about some riches and wonders.
Riches and Wonders. And I do like the song more than Pink and Blue. Shocker. It's better than my least favorite song on the album. And some of the reasons for that is I think the singing is a lot stronger and more focused on a track like this. And thinking about it, it's kind of an inverse to Color in Your Cheeks in a sense, because while Color in Your Cheeks is about trying to find an out and trying to find some way to deal with your misgivings and dealing with people who are trying to get out of their own misgivings by going into another possible misgiving of alcohol abuse. This feels like a more of a, hey, we've survived all these different experiences, and while all of our experiences may not necessarily be positive, we are coming together to experience that one and all. One of the lines that really stuck out to me in this one is, we show loyalty to the hard times we've been through. So it's kind of like that thing wherever, and I'm guilty of this just as much as anybody else, the whole concept of you can laugh about it now based on moments in your life that might have been a little on the traumatic side, but you can look back on and say, you know what, I survived it, I can have a good laugh about it, and that's kind of the vibe I get from the song as a whole. It's not my top 3 either. We, again, only have one slot in that top 3 that has been exposed so far. But yeah, I thought this song was much better than Pink and Blue, and a strong refocusing of the album as a whole.
So my thoughts and feelings about like this track here, I mean, they kind of remind me, like I really like it a lot. If I had to rank it compared to like the rest of the tracks in the album, this would probably be right outside of my top three. And like it brings such a complex message and story with it in terms of like all the different kind of emotions it's trying to like highlight and bring to the table. And one section I want to highlight that kind of encapsulates like all the different kind of feelings is literally the last set of lyrics, which read, "You felt shelter somewhere in me. I found great comfort in you. I keep you safe from harm. You held me in your arms, and I want to go home, but I am home." So, like, that refrain that's heard throughout the whole track, and I want to go home, but I am home, about, like, feeling like you want to get to a place of comfort and, like, safety within your life, even though, like, you're with, like, this, like, significant other, and, like, you guys find, like, comfort and shelter in each other, but ultimately, like, at the end of the day, like, something's going on, and, like, you aren't quite comfortable. It's just like, that one little tick that is just not allowing you to enjoy the moment. And for that, and like, there's like, a couple different moments that you highlighted earlier on in the track here that I really do appreciate. And it just, the way that he's able to explore such a wide range of complex emotions absolutely appeals to me in this track here. And yeah, like I said, could easily like cracked my top three. But compare this to Jenny, I feel like Jenny does a better job at like fleshing out the story completely. And then comparing this to Color in Your Cheeks, like Color in Your Cheeks captures a feeling like no other track in this album can, with the exception of one that's coming up here relatively shortly. However, though, like, Riches and Wonders is still a fantastic track in its own right.
It really is, and it's a very uplifting track, especially compared to, again, some of the other ones we talked about, whether it be Color in Your Cheeks or Balance or Fault Lines. Like, this feels like more of a compromise of all of the experiences so far. And possibly it could have been a little higher, maybe even if it had been further down the album, sort of as a consolation. Hey, here's, we've been through all this, now we can just laugh about it. But that's not what Mr. Darnielle decided to do.
So, I feel like we're ready to talk about, like, the mess inside, if you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. Let's talk about the mess inside.
So, dude, I fucking love this song. So, like, it's amazing. Like, we've discussed, like, in several points in this episode here alone, that there's, like, plenty enough moments that John brings to the table where, like, you forget about the lo-fi recording, you forget about the fact that you just have, like, a white dude singing to you with an acoustic guitar, singing a folk song. You can actually get kind of transfixed in the moment and, like, what the emotion that Mr. Darnielle is able to, like, bring to the table. This takes everything up to an 11, in my opinion, because, like, you get great moments and great stories about, like, how the narrator in this here story is trying to recreate, like, special intimate moments like him and his significant other has shared, in order to get that lover to, like, love him like they used to. But ultimately, he's basically kind of, like, resided to the fact that, like, they cannot run, they cannot hide, and they've made a wreck of, like, of their house. And, like, I like the imagery and, like, the specific use of the word house, because you think about, like, somebody's house is somewhere where, like, you're supposed to feel at home, you're supposed to feel at safe. I mean, you want to go home. And actually, even thinking about it here, I love how Riches and Wonders had that refrain of "I now want to go home, but I am home." Now we get into the mess inside and talking about the mess that they made of their own house. Like it's a very nice contrast, and it makes you even appreciate the track even more. And dude, I even love this track just for the fact alone of how emotional and how heartfelt John Darnielle sings in those moments where he's talking about you cannot run, you cannot hide, that little if you want to call it a chorus, it is just so impactful in every sense of the word. And we have arrived at my favorite track on this album by a country mile.
Well, this is awkward, much like a Halloween party where we dress up as the same person in the same costume, because much like you, this is also my favorite song on the album. By a country mile, honestly, as well, because it is so strong in its delivery. I mean, like you mentioned, the lyrics are great, but they're a lot more simplistic on this track. It's more of a traditional style of song in a sense. Very much a verse, refrain, chorus type of deal. But again, the passion that John Darnielle singing is so strong that it's such a relatable experience, or at least, an understandable experience for those who may not have done it themselves. They can understand how others have. And it's delivered with such clarity, such strength, the way he sings. You cannot run and you cannot hide the mess inside. It is the best singing he has on this album by far. And what's great about it is that even though it follows a more traditional format and has very strong, powerful singing, it does not lose its sense of a confessional tone. You could feel the pain that he's feeling as he's singing this song. Realizing, like you said, that whatever he's dealing with, whatever relationship that he's trying to fix, cannot be fixed. It's over. So, yeah, I'm right there with you. Best song on this album by far.
And even thinking about our I don't know, our last review, which was Future Teens, is Hard Feelings. And for those of you who've not checked out that review, let alone that album, please go check out both. Both me and Matt really enjoyed that album, and we both experienced that band live. But one track in that album that stood out to me was Down to Fall in Love. And the way that Amy was able to portray such an honest expression of human emotion, it caught I would put that track up against The Mess Inside, and The Mess Inside kind of blows that out of the water. And that's saying something, because the way that I absolutely gushed about that track, Matt knows this pretty well. I was saying I can probably make that track its own podcast episode, with me just rambling on about it, on and 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 on. But yeah. Sorry, I kind of buffered there for a second.
You really did.
But yeah. Overall, though, both me and Matt cannot say enough fantastic things about the track The Mess Inside. So I feel like it's time to talk about some Jeff Davis and those county blues that Jeff Davis has experienced.
Jeff Davis County Blues. And in my opinion, this is a pretty good, if not great, follow-up to The Mess Inside, where it's a bit more of a hush tone. Darnielle singing is a lot more back down to earth than it was on The Mess Inside, but doesn't necessarily lose its clarity in describing how whether it's returning home from jail or wanting to just drive down the highway and figure his own mind out. You can almost envision the way that he sings about finding these different exits, coming back home to Midland, Texas, and sort of being in the car with him when he's doing this, as he's driving away from perhaps the mess inside, as it were. And it's a very stripped down song, and it's a very hushed tone, as I had mentioned. And the outro of this song, once again, much like it did on Color in Your Cheeks, just sort of dries on out. And it, again, allows the listener and allows Darnielle himself to breathe as they're trying to assess where they're at. And I'm going to be honest with you, I did get the 1-2 punch. This is my second favorite song on the album.
Well, this is awkward. Um, it's not quite the same thing where we end up dressing as like the same in the same costume at a Halloween party. This is more like you showed up as Mario and I showed up as like Bowser. I was gonna try to use another Nintendo villain, but just like you, this song here ranks as like a second in my specific noteworthy moments in an album listing. But like unfortunately, this is my second least favorite track on the album. That was a long way to get to my main point there, dude.
It was, but at least your metaphor was nice and wholesome. I was gonna suggest that it was as if I had dressed as JD Vance and you had dressed up as a sofa, but please move along.
I love how we keep bringing up politics in this specific episode here, dude.
It's an election year, damn it. We're going to. It's inevitable. It's inevitable. Keith Martell, politics is inevitable. Please continue.
So I mean, when I say like this track here specifically is is my second least favorite track, I don't I'm not gonna say it's not a bad track by any means, but because there's been countless amount of tracks that we've covered in the history of our show here where tracks have landed in my bottom three and that have been absolute clunkers, but not even really comparing this track to the rest of the album. It just doesn't do enough for me to really drive home that feeling of hopelessness. I mean, yes, I can get the concept of what John was going for here, where you get the imagery of this guy driving at night and missing a turn off, and him looking at talking about Polaroids of the two of them scattered on the passenger seat, and him driving slowly and eating early and dreaming about home. I get that. It kind of reminds me, at least in a lyrical sense, of when we did the Gang of Youth episode, the song "Goal of the Century," where you get very brief, sparse moments of just words that aren't really doing enough to drive home the point for me. I mean, I know what they're going for, but they're not doing a good enough job for me. And at the risk of sounding redundant, I feel like that's basically my thoughts and feelings about the track are. So, second least favorite track. It's not my least favorite track. When we get to that track, I'll discuss my reasons why. But it just this track here just fell out of the normal placement in terms of the rest of the tracks on this album.
Which is understandable. Again, you're entitled to your opinions, and I can understand where you're coming from. And also, again, I took a little bit more of a liking to it, but I understand trying to follow up something along the lines with The Mess Inside may not necessarily work for everybody. So that being said, are you ready to move on to Distant Stations?
Yeah, man. And this track here, it's a very interesting track because when I first, listened to All Hail West Texas within the context of listening along in the podcast that I mentioned at the beginning of this show here, I only listened to the Mountain Goats. I really kind of took this as a distant kind of love song where of the concept like, hey, you taught me how to listen to distant stations. But as I listened a little closer in, like, and after, hearing, like, reading about what John Darnielle had to say about this song here specifically, and how it's not like, a romantic song, it's more of a stalker song. It kind of changed the whole game for me and how I felt about it. I mean, I still have the same appreciation for it. If anything, maybe a little bit more. But still, like, it's not cracking my top three. I mean, we've already established what my top three are. And it's not near my top three. It's kind of like in that middle upper half of like my feelings on like the album and the tracks within that this album are. But diving a little bit into this track here, you get John delivering like really great songwriting, really great lyrics that are painting such a vivid picture, and like even like outside of the whole stalker motif that I literally just mentioned, two moments that I want to highlight like that work in parallel, and they like you can really just picture what's going on. It's such a mundane moment, but I do appreciate it. Lyrics that are reading, I found an old rock in the dry dirt outside the door of my hotel room. It was a triangle with soft rounded edges and a split down the middle of one corner. It was darker than English moss, green like the soft frills of a peacock's plume. And then after that, you get lyrics that read, I saw the sky break. I threw a rock at a crow who was playing in the mulch of some rose bushes by the motel office. Missed him by a good yard or two. So, like, you get that rock, he picks it up, he throws it at a crow. Again, incredibly mundane moment, but the way that he's able to deliver the lyrics, like, they work out so well. Like, it is pretty haunting when you really sit down and think about it. Like, you get the lyrics that say, I said a small prayer for the poor, the naked, and the hungry, and I prayed real hard for you. I waited for you, but I never told you where I was. It was you who taught me how to write this kind of equation. I waited on the steps for you, and I hid in the bushes whenever a car pulled into the parking lot. Overall, really great track for me. It picks to the pace after Jeff Davis County Blues for me, and it's just interesting how Darnielle's able to make a song like this, because you think about it, there's not too many stalker songs out there that kind of land casually on the listener's ears. So yeah, pretty great track for me.
I like it too, and it is fascinating that you talk about this being such a casual, up-tempo, almost playful type of track, given what Darnielle describes as a subject matter of it being about a stalker. It almost sounds like sort of a early 70s trucker song, where it's just, very twangy and almost countryish in those vibes. And what makes it even more so is the way that Darnielle is hell-bent on putting as many words as he can into a single line of a song. I mean, just the way he's riffing on, I think it's the second verse, where he's just fitting as many words as he possibly can, and just speaking at rapid speed, where it's just what did you just say, and what is this all about? So that was a very interesting choice in of itself. But otherwise, again, I like this song a lot too. It's another good, solid song, and it definitely does pick up the tempo. And maybe the reason it is so up-tempo is sort of a sonic reset compared to the sort of dourness of Jeff Davis County Blues, which in itself was the follow-up to the melancholy The Mess Inside. So for this to be a playful song, despite the dark matter within the song, I think is a good artistic choice, and I'm glad the song is on the album where it is.
Yeah, and I'm gonna make a connection to this song to a later song in the album itself. But I mean, when the opportunity does arise for me to make that connection, I will go ahead and make it. But that being said, I think it's time that we discuss the next track, which is Blues in Dallas.
Blues in Dallas. This song is the weirdest song on the album, and that's saying something considering A, we just got done talking about an up-tempo song about a stalker, and B, because this album is so lo-fi and was recorded on a boombox, how could anything with such low tendencies be that weird? And the way they do it, or he does it particularly, is by adding keyboard drums and a keyboard in a way that sounds like hotel music in an elevator from hell. Not that to say that in a necessarily bad way, because I do kind of dig this song for its weirdness. It's almost like trying to push it in somebody's face. Again, a lot of people, rock critics, particularly in the 90s and 2000s, even the 80s to an extent, were taking blues very seriously. And if you didn't talk about the blues with a certain reverence, you were considered a poser or some kind of dumbass who didn't know what they were talking about. And I feel like the way that blues is being represented here, and I could be overthinking and over talking about this, but the way that it just is so campy with that hotel keyboard and that percussion is just very funny to me. Not in my top three, however, because while it is fun and campy and does provide a nice little refresher of sardonic nature, very similar to that, I think, of it was Brothers off of the Gang of Youth album, where it's just David LaPepe and the piano, where he's just like going across his entire family's history with the disdain of, hey, guess what I just found out? That's kind of what I'm reminded of here, but it is repetitive, and the mixing isn't great either, because the voice sounds like it was recorded like so far away and on a different track than the rest of the band, quote unquote. But again, it's such a novelty-ish track that I can't help but appreciate it.
And there's something to be said about, like, you think about, like, how literally this album began with the best ever death metal band in Denton, and how, like, you get the contrast in, like, how the world is trying to suppress, like, the youthful spirit of, like, Jeff and Cyrus, and how they want to form this death metal band. And how, like, you get this kind of song here where, like, blues is, like, traditionally, I don't want to say it's specifically a Texas thing, but I could definitely see, like, the point that you were trying to make there. If like, there is camp in there, I could definitely see it being intentional. But for me, dude, like, this is my least favorite track on the album. I don't want to say by a country mile. You catch me on a good day, and I could maybe appreciate this track a little bit more. Maybe because it just feels out of place. And even further thinking about this track here, the reason why it's like my least favorite track, like, yes, it's not a bad track by any means. I mean, you get that little, like, you get a break from the guitar where you get, like, that like, that synth and that little, like, false, like, drum machine that the synth is providing there. But, like, and you actually get, like, a hook for the first time in this album with Blues in Dallas. But it just feels out of place, and it feels like it could have been left on the cutting room floor. And I feel like if it was left on the cutting room floor, I would definitely enjoy the album, maybe just a hair more. But overall, not a bad track by any means. I mean, I did appreciate the nuance of blues and, like, just how they changed up the instrumentation. Maybe it could have been done a little bit better. But overall, though, like, in the context of this album here and how I feel about it as a whole, this is my least favorite track on it.
And I totally empathize with your ideal of a song being so out of place that you feel like it doesn't belong on an album that has a consistent tone. For those who want to go way back in the archives to, I think, our, like, 4th or 5th episode, which was Speaking in Tongues by the Talking Heads, And you listen to my thoughts about a little song called Swamp. A little bit more of a harsher tone, but definitely similar to what Ryan's talking about here. But for me, the out of touchness and the out of placeness kind of feels in place for some weird reason for me.
Yeah, and I can get that. Maybe someday if we discuss a specific Alice in Chains album, maybe we can discuss like how the contrast and like how one specific song sticks out like a sore thumb really can throw the listener for a loop. But that'll be maybe for another episode. But in regards to this episode, I am ready to talk about some Source Decay. Are you?
I am.
So, this is the penultimate track on the album, and I like how this track here, it seems like it's wrapping up a lot of the themes and a lot of emotions and the stories as a whole that the album's brought to the table. Like, I feel like, you could easily make a through line with a lot of the tracks from Jenny on in terms of like how a couple has fell in love and they eventually discover that there's cracks in their engine and like countless amount of examples that you can draw a parallel to. In this track here, the narrator that we're following, he is essentially trying to get closure and examining the past of what the relationship was, and at the end of it, man, he can't find closure. And I hate to say it, ladies and gentlemen, a great message in life is sometimes you don't get closure. Sometimes things just don't work out, and you're gonna have to be okay with that, because otherwise, I hate to say it, life is going to be very long and hard for you. But lyrics here that I specifically do like, talking about the wishing for closure and how emotions can take over a person. Lyrics reading such as, I fell out of the car like a hostage from a plane. Think of you a while, start wishing it would rain, and you're thinking and thinking of that person that you used to love and starting to wish it would rain. And I would bet it's not literal rain, it's more just wishing just to get it over with, get all the emotions out there, get everything out there so he can finally move on with his life. And another line that I really do like here is when he's talking about torture devices for my old best friend. So that could be photos that you're looking at, memories that you're looking at, in order to maybe process what has happened in your life, but it ends up just hurting you in the end. And at first, this track here, when I listened to it prior to review purposes within this podcast, it kind of flew on by for me, but I was very glad I was able to sit down and see what Darnielle was bringing to the table here, because it's a really good message and I really do like it. And I'm actually going to bump this up in my track rankings as well. Again, not going to crack my top 3, but it's improved as with multiple listens and me literally talking about it right now.
Yeah, this is a song that I'll probably have to come back to and maybe appreciate more with repeated listens of this album. But I do appreciate it for what it is now, and it is, again, a return back to the tone of the majority of the album, which is stripped down boombox, Darnielle and guitar. Very much that's all it is. And there are some, I think, maybe with the exception of The Mess Inside, this is probably the strongest singing that Darnielle does on the entire album. It's very clear, concise, strong, and impassioned. The lyrics, I think, are, pretty good too. Not necessarily standoutish in their tune, although I do like the fact that you're talking about how he's, trying to process where he's at in life now, and using metaphors of old photos and raindrops. And I'm thinking, oh, This is literally just him summarizing disintegration. That's all he's doing in the span of one song. I appreciate that. But one line that I don't remember Robert Smith ever talking about across the spectrum of disintegration, in which John Darnielle does do on this album, is the line, "I wish the West Texas Highway was a Mobius strip. I could ride it out forever." And as someone who loves to drive, that's just a great ass line. Like, I love the idea of just being able to drive on a highway forever, whether you need to clear your mind out or, just want to go for a drive. I love that line. But otherwise, this song is solid. It's pretty good, and a very good way to get things back on track after the weird detour that was Blues in Dallas.
So, you ready to close her out here with the last track?
The final track on All Hail West Texas is the Absolute Lit Hops Effect, or perhaps Absolute Lift Hops. I'm not sure. I don't care. It is a solid closer of a track on this album. And once again, I feel like it's somewhat similar in tone to the closer from another album that we reviewed, which is Brave Faces Everyone by Spanish Love Songs, where the tone is, okay, I have no idea where we go from here, but I have to go somewhere. This has to go somewhere because, like you said, Ryan, sometimes you're not going to get closure, but at the same time, just because, things don't close doesn't necessarily mean you have to stand and wait or sit and wait until it is closed. So if you're going to move on in life, you actually have to move. And I think that's what this song's about. And again, Darnielle does a great job of presenting this in a way that is, again, akin to everything else that we've talked about on the album in its lo-fi nature, its impassioned detail, and very on-the-mark singing. It's another one, much like Source Decay, where I'll have to probably give another listen to truly appreciate. But even in the context in of itself, I like the song quite a bit.
I do too, man, and it's a very interesting way to end the album as a whole, because, like, this song, it's basically about, like, waiting, and, like, not even waiting in the sense of, like, just wait, like what Blues in Dallas was, like, talking about. It's more about, like, okay, so you had the heartbreak, you cried your emotions, but this is you, like, just living with that. And, like, you get lyrics that are reading, "My insides are pink and raw, and it hurts me when I move my jaw, but I'm taking tiny steps forward." And, like, you just get the plain imagery throughout this track of, like, somebody who's just, sequestered in their apartment or in their room, that they have isolated themselves from the world, and they're just thinking about this. They literally, like, in here, it's not really hinted that it's an ex-lover, but, like, in the context of this album here, it's basically talking about Jenny and, like, an ex-lover in concept. And one other thing that I'm going to just say about here is that I feel like there's a through line that draws this track here to the narrator in Distant Stations, because the way that the track ends here is that you get the lyrics, "After one blind season alone in here, after one long sweltering summer, I'm gonna find the exit, and I will go to the house of a friend I know, and I will let myself forget." Like, you can imagine, like, oh, hey, this person has gone through these emotions, he's isolated himself, and then he's just resigning himself to being a stalker of this ex-lover. And, like, even, like, going back to Distant Stations for, like, a quick second, you think about, like, how that song, it's not really, like, like, it doesn't really match the traditional feel of a stalker song, like we mentioned. It's more of like a, I don't want to say a happy-go-lucky, but it's just like, just a almost kind of a plain emotion. And, I mean, I'm not one who's ever stalked anybody. Weird sentence for me to say out loud. But And I've never been stalked, as far as I know. If you are out there stalking me, shout out to you. Hopefully you keep you keep on keeping on, and like you don't let me catch you.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I just I feel like people who get in that mindset, like they don't feel like they're messed up. They just put this person on a pedestal, but they don't know how to interact with them. So it's a very interesting through line that I made here, and I love where my dialogue just went with like making that comparison. So yeah, overall though, great way to end off the album, and it was a very interesting and great album, my good sir.
I agree. It is a great, interesting album full of detail, and I think the way that we discussed it was also strong and full of detail, and we did it, man.
We did it. We discovered what it means to hail West Texas.
We did. We did. We got on that Kawasaki and rode it down the West Texas Highway.
And yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead with my overall thoughts and ratings on the album. Then I'll kick it over to you. So for an album that I own twice on vinyl, for a group that I clearly do appreciate, maybe not for their entire discography, but for moments in time, whether it's specific singles or albums that I latch onto for various reasons. This album here, All Hail West Texas, despite of how lo-fi it is and how basic in concept it is, and I feel like this, if I'm not mistaken, because the next album in the discography for the Mountain Goats is Tallahassee, and that's where you get more of a full production, full band that comes in. This album here is very special, and it's for the many stories that it tells. And like I said in the opening track discussion, the best ever death metal band in Denton, the way that John is able to portray such amazing, I would say pretty interesting stories in an amazing fashion that really captures human emotion at its core. It's a rather fantastic listen. Some of the tracks don't hit for me, like I mentioned with Jeff Davis County Blues and Blues in Dallas. Apparently I don't like any tracks here with the name Blues in it. But overall, though, it's a fantastic album. An album that I'm glad I own twice on vinyl. I know I said throughout this review here that I was bumping up various scores. However, it's not enough to take it up another peg for me in terms of my rating on the album. So I'm going to still stay at my rating of a solid 8 out of 10 for All Hail West Texas.
I am right there with you. I am also going to give this an 8 out of 10. I like this album a lot. It's a strong discovery on your part for me to have listened to. Again, the way that this album sounds front to back, again, even with the weird detours of Distant Stations and Blues in Dallas, it's just a guy with a guitar, and he has a lot on his mind, and he's going to let you know it, even if he has to put it out on a cassette tape or through a cassette tape and somehow convert it to CD and get it out to the world, where it has turned into a podcast, a covers album based on the podcast, and for all we know, a full-fledged musical that could result in John Darnielle getting an EGOT. But that being said, some great tracks off this album. The confessional tone, the detailed nature of the lyrics are fantastic throughout. Even when I don't like the singing, particularly on songs like Pink and Blue, the details are still there, and they tell very interesting stories. Again, this is a strong album. The only real knock I have on it, aside from the little details I mentioned earlier, it's just a little on the repetitive side, and some of the tracks sort of do blend in together and sort of fade into its own background. But otherwise, again, very, very good album, and I'm glad you recommended this. 8 out of 10 for me as well.
So, for those of you who are wondering what our collective score is between me and Matt, It is an easy 8 out of 10 because
Math.
so for when it came to the next album recommendation for me, I could have went a couple different ways with this. I could have went with couple of their later albums, and when I mean there, I mean his later albums in one John Darnielle. I could have went with Goths or Bleed Out, but I felt like it was only right to go with like an album that appeared in earlier in their catalog, not earlier than All Hail West Texas, because I'm not familiar with that end of their discography. But the album that I'm going to land on, it's an album called The Sunset Tree, and the reason why I'm picking that album is mainly for the fact that a lot of my favorite Mountain Goats tracks themselves end up on that album. You get out like tracks like This Year and Up the Wolves, both fantastic tracks. This Year is a track that I can go back to time in, time out, where I feel like a year is just beating me in, beating me down. And it's a good end of the year track for me. And then you get Up the Wolves, which is the reason why I fell in love with that track is it was used as a very good intentional needle drop in an episode of The Walking Dead that featured the character Daryl going back home and exploring his I want to almost say childhood trauma, and that's what made me appreciate that track. So easy recommendation for me. If you dug All Hail West Texas, check out the album The Sunset Tree by the same band that we literally just discussed.
And I'm going to go in a different direction slightly with my recommendation. It is from 1972. It is the third and final album to be released while this artist was still alive, and that is the album Pink Moon by Nick Drake. It is largely a acoustic with vocal album, much like this one is. The production is a little cleaner, but not necessarily less raw in its emotion or sort of stripped down mentality. Some familiar songs that people may recognize on there, like From the Morning or even Road. And it's an album I haven't listened to in a while, but I definitely want to revisit based on having listened to this album. So Pink Moon by Nick Drake would be my next album choice.
Cool. So those of you who just want a recap of everything that we just discussed, we both rated the album 8 out of 10. My recommendation for a next album would be The Sunset Tree by the Mountain Goats themselves, and then Matt's recommendation is Pink Moon by Nick Drake, but not Drake himself, because that would be an interesting covers album. But yeah. And ultimately, at the end of the day, both me and Matt do heavily recommend everybody checking out All Hail West Texas. I think we've talked about enough about the Mountain Goats. It almost seems like we've been talking for 2 reviews at this point. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But, Matt, it is your turn to pick our next journey. So, where are we going from here?
So much like you did with this album, I'm not going to provide much context either, except for the fact that we're going in two wild, we could go in 2 wildly different directions, and you will pick one of them based on this album. So I'm going to give you the option of 2 body parts, and those body parts are melted face or shaved legs.
Okay, and I'm going to pull a Uno reverse card on you, and I'm going to go with melted face.
I had a sinking suspicion you would. So, spoiler alert, this is not the first time we've talked about the Mountain Goats. In fact, it's the second time in as many days as we've done so, because of, for lack of a better term, technical difficulties. So last time Ryan picked the shaved legs. This time he is picking the melted face. And I will honor that by letting you know that our next album is from 1980. And it is the third release, the third eponymous release, because he's weird like that, from one Peter Gabriel. And it is the famous album with the melted face cover. Hence the melted face.
Oh, okay. Is it a self-titled album?
Yes, it is a self-titled album. It is the third.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it is the third self-titled album of his career.
Okay, cool. A little bit more familiar with Peter Gabriel than the other choice that we had, and I was able to play that Uno reverse card on you just to change things up a little bit. That way, it isn't as predictable. So, listener, if you have enjoyed that Uno reverse card and you want to make sure that you are familiar with what that Uno reverse card sounds like before our next review, make sure you check out the 1980 release by Peter Gabriel. That way you know what me and Matt are going to be talking about in the next review. Yeah. Anything else you want to add to this review discussion as a whole before we send it on out?
No, except again, I appreciate you introducing me to the Mountain Goats and letting me experience this album. It was a great time, man.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe we'll be back talking about getting into knives or something like that. Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed this episode of Hey, Listen to This, the best way you can show your appreciation to me and Matt for providing such an episode to your eardrums right now is on that podcasting platform of choice. Make sure that you follow us. Subscribe, whatever action you need to do to keep up to date with our episodes. If you're listening to us on the YouTubes, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment below. A positive rating on any of the podcasting platforms does go a long way to help spreading the word about what me and Matt do here. And if you're interested in checking out our social media, links are in the description. And if you want to do an episode request, you can reach us at ttheylisten@gmail.com. And for the last time, about two men who are not Joe Biden, but we are talking about the Mountain Goats and how they are hailing West Texas. I am the one. I am the only. I am the undeniably, charismatically good-looking Ryan James Kearns.
And I am the one, the only, the glad that we were able to talk about the Mountain Goats and very much looking forward to Peter Gabriel, Matthew James Durzik.
And, yeah, I don't know. It's times like this, life is kind of really just beating me down. But you know what mantra I keep in mind?
What's that?
It's a pirate's life for me.